welcome to the first edition of the 2019 Energy Week show. Ellen and I are back. Dr. Energy, how was your holiday?
My holiday was fantastic. We actually had really nice weather on New Year's, so it was almost like it wasn't January. It's like it was I don't know, April.
Yeah, it's kind of been going up and down over here in Texas. It's like 30 one day and then 70 the next, and so it's I think the high today is like 75 or something. So it's just kind of depends on which day you catch us on to do that. But yeah, no, had a great time as well, and looking forward to 2019. Let's see what all it holds. I did mention to you offline, we did get EnergyWeekPodcast.com will be coming soon, so hopefully the next, I don't want to put a timetable, 2-3 weeks, month, we'll have that maybe up and running. But a lot to get to today. Let's talk a little bit about Libya. This kind of headline surprised me a little bit. Maybe I'm not in the Libya loop like you are, but it did kind of surprise me with some of the other narratives that we've been seeing around the oil and gas market. It reads, Libya plans to more than double oil output to 2.1 million barrels per day. With some of what we talked about ending last year with the prices falling, potential OPEC cuts, the market responding, yada, yada, yada. How does this fit into that narrative, Ellen?
I think a lot of people were very skeptical when they saw this headline because Libya has just been this constant source of utter instability in terms of production. You know, 1 month it'll be way up and it looks like things are going great, and then the next thing you know, some rebels will come and they'll take over a loading, platform, and the next thing you know, their production will dip way down. And even OPEC is skeptical of Libya's oil production because in the latest round of decision making on cuts, Libya was still exempted from making any cuts, basically with this knowledge that they're going to be cutting anyway because who knows what's happening there.
Right. Now, I should clarify, this is by 2021, so it's not like they're going to ramp this up in the next 6 months. But like as you mentioned, there's been so much instability there for Libya, not hating on Libya, but for them to project what they can do by 2021, I think it's safe to assume they'd have a hard time projecting the stability inside the country for the next 6 months, much less, a few years out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, right now it says they're producing 953,000 barrels per day, which is under their they call it a civil war, but just general instability capacity, which is 1.6. So if they want to produce 2.1, they've got to actually expand their capacity. They're not just talking about putting in place, security reforms and things like that. They're actually talking about expanding. And I think most people are really just kind of skeptical about them actually working on that. Although, it sounds like a nice goal, but highly unrealistic.
Yeah, I wondered if it was more of a kind of a PR play, like, hey, things are going to calm down over here. Come to Libya and invest or work or give us money or whatever the case may be. Kind of one of those general calls. So
you don't need your extra security because things are perfectly safe over here.
Leave your AK-47 at home. It's all good here. So okay. Let's go to Reuters. China cuts refiners' oil import quotas with first 2019 allowances, and the first paragraph just says something to that effect. China issued its first batch of crude oil imports quotas for 2019 on Wednesday at a lower volume than for the same batch a year ago, though expectations are for the volumes to climb later this year. The first paragraph seems to kind of say, well, hey, it's lower, but nah, it shouldn't really be much to worry about. What was your takeaway?
I thought this was a really interesting article, and I think I tweeted about it when I first saw it because so much was dependent during the last oil downturn in 2015, 2016 on this incredible growth in Chinese refining and the fact that the Chinese kept upping their quotas for oil imports, in particular the ones for the small independent refineries that they call teapots, but I don't like to use that term, so I just go with independent refineries. And they were really this life. They kind of helped keep oil demand alive in many ways during this time. And so now you're looking, and one of the things that's interesting is, I think it's very difficult to get a handle on what oil demand is going to be.
Mhm.
But the fact that China actually goes out and grants quotas for, beforehand actually does tell you a bit. It's like the one case where China actually does give data that actually helps,
Mhm.
as opposed to all the other times where they either just don't give data or give data that's actually wrong and incorrect because they're trying to hide something. So they granted quotas totaling a certain number of tons, and I hate people who do their oil stuff in tons. Why can't everyone just use barrels per day
Right.
like everybody else?
Right.
Russia and China, I'm looking at you, and India too. Um, but anyway, um, I'm sure that the rest of the world wishes we would just use the metric system, so can't be too picky. But what I thought was really interesting was so they're saying so that the quotas are down, okay,
For the
and
first
that
month.
right, or for the first like allocation period, which I think is more than a month.
I'm
It's
sorry. I'm
like
sorry. Yeah,
six
yeah, yeah, yeah,
months.
yeah. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, first batch
First
of quote.
batch.
So
I'm
it's
sorry.
yeah, which is I think the first allowance, which is either 6 months or goes through September. I'm not sure exactly. But what's interesting is so they're down, um, but one of the interesting things was they said that one of the four sources with knowledge of the quotas who works for a private Chinese refiner said they received about a third of its annual quota in the first batch. So
Hmm.
they got a lot less in the first batch, but they think they're going to get the rest of it in the second batch. So that means that maybe just for the first half of 2019, demand will look like it's down, but then it's going to come back up in the second half. So I thought that was a very interesting
Right.
point there. And these refineries do a lot of exporting of products in the Asia region. And the other interesting thing that I thought, which came at the very end, had to do with new refineries.
Mm-hmm.
So there are two new petrochemical facilities that are starting new refineries in 2019, and each of those got quotas. So if these new refineries are starting up, they got quotas, but the other quotas were down. So then the rest of 2019, are we suddenly going to see a huge jump in the second half of 2019 in oil demand from China with these older refineries and whatnot getting their full quotas, and with these new petrochemical facilities getting new demand? So everyone's talking about demand being down from China, but I'm kind of wondering if that's really just a temporary thing that we're going to see in the first part of 2019, and we could actually see a huge rebound in the second half.
Right. Yeah. I was. That's the. I was going to ask you about that directly because I was trying to put all those pieces together. It says overall, though, the start up of new refineries in China in 2019 is expected to raise crude imports to a record, adding 630,000 barrels per day of new demand, 7% higher than last year, according to SIA Energy. And so I was reading that, going, okay. Are you saying then that despite this first batch is going to be down overall for the entire year, you're actually expecting 630,000 barrels of new demand? That's how I read that. Is that the right way to focus on that, or am I not reading it
No,
correctly?
I think you're right. I think that, but it was like hidden at the end of the article.
Right,
It's like they hid the important part,
right,
at the end, which is that it could really explode in the second half of 2019.
right. And that makes me wonder because I saw someone the other day, and I can't remember who it is. But if I remember correctly, I remember reading what they said. I know it was. I think it was in Phil Flynn's report, maybe, and he was saying that some. I don't want to miscontribute to anybody, but it's someone that was halfway credible. I'll say it. I was reading, and they were saying that there's predictions of Brent hitting $90 a barrel by the third or fourth quarter this year, based upon this, that, or the other. And so, I just kind of read that. And I was like, huh, wow, that'd be a nice thing to see, but I don't, well, we got a long way to go till we get there. But anyway, I just, if you'd have to have, um, an increase in growth demand, as we talked about, to see the prices get that high. So I don't know. I just was trying to put all that together with this.
And everyone, I think there's a misperception. Everyone looks a lot at Chinese manufacturing outputs.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I don't think that that's necessarily the best indicator of oil demand because, because first of all, China is rapidly becoming a consumer economy and they need oil to drive their cars.
Right.
So, manufacturing outputs are not going to show that, but also because if they're opening new petrochemical facilities, well, like you need oil and gas to, make those things.
Right.
So
And,
I just wonder if people are concentrating way too much on what's happening in the beginning of 2019 and they're not taking into account what we could see coming out of China in the second half.
and here's an interesting statistic that's in here. Refineries only use 71% of the quotas allocated between January and October of 2018, the period that the government used to determine the quotas for the first batch of 2019. So
Oh, that's interesting.
right, so if I'm reading that, that they were oversupplied by basically 30% for the first 8-9 months of the year. And so maybe that their batch numbers were a little bit too optimistic for 2018, and we saw the price fall. The fourth quarter of 20, the years are all running together now. The fourth quarter of last year, well, maybe there was more built into the price than even we were thinking at that time.
Yeah. And so I just think that China is a really important aspect to keep an eye on when you're looking at demand for the coming year, and to understand that what's happening right now is not necessarily what's going to be happening in the second half.
Okay. All right, let's turn now to the Wall Street Journal. This broke the Twitter OOTT internet, if you will. Some people loved it, some people hated it, some people, it seemed like there was a lot of confirmation bias going on with this article, or
Oh yeah.
or
Oh
people were
yeah.
accusing people of confirmation bias, depending on which side of the debate you're on. If you haven't read it, the Wall Street Journal published on January 2nd, fracking secret problem, oil wells aren't producing as much as forecast. There is a lot of meat in this on this bone, if you will. This is a long, lengthy piece. There are some things I thought in here that were really well put together, and some things that I thought were lacking. I'll let you kind of take the first stab, and we can go from there.
So I read this with great interest, mostly because I wanted to know what you thought about it. I kind of tried to hold off making my assumptions. I think that it's not. I don't think it's quite as big a headline as they maybe wanted it to
Mm-hmm.
seem. I mean, I think it's pretty clear. Everyone has an idea of what they're going to get from the well, and the fact that their forecasts for what they would get, for how productive a well would be, fell short. It's not necessarily as big a deal as they were making it seem, and as the Wall Street Journal was making it seem. And as I was interesting, because this wasn't, at first I thought it was original work done by the Wall Street Journal, and then I realized that they were just writing about a Rystad
Mm-hmm.
report.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a little upset because I kind of wanted to see the Rystad data. And then it was kind of interesting because at the end of the article, they say something like, well, we all know that, and we just go and, like, everyone knows that there are that there are these that they over forecast the
Right.
well productivity, and people just go and drill wells somewhere else, and it's not a big deal.
Right.
Anyway, so what was your take?
Well, so my first thing that kind of struck me, and I'm curious, the first paragraph, it says thousands of shale wells drilled in the last 5 years are pumping less oil and gas than their owners forecast to investors, raising questions about the strength and profitability of the fracking boom that turned the U.S. into an oil superpower. And I read that first paragraph and I thought, okay, so if we go back 5 years, okay, let's just go back, so 2019, so to 2014. In 2014, Ellen, what would you have said the chances of the U.S. being an oil superpower? And we can debate whether we are or not, but at least the Wall Street Journal considering us an oil superpower. Would that have been a realistic projection, far off projection? What would you have said about that headline in 2014, 2015?
I would have said not likely.
Not likely.
I would have said among some of the important producers, but not an oil superpower. I never
Okay.
would have said that.
And so for me, that was kind of the problem I have with this whole article was, if you're going to say that the U.S. is an oil superpower, then you have to admit that that all the other projections were also way off about what we could produce. So, and that's what David Blackman pointed out on the Texas Oil and Gas podcast the other day. He said that if you look at the amount of oil that the U.S. has produced from 17 to 18 and how much it increased, he said he thought he was really optimistic and he was blown away by how much it's increased. So it doesn't diminish some of the other points in here, but to me it's kind of this weird dynamic where you're saying, well, they're missing the mark. Sure, that's definitely going on. But on the flip side, hasn't everyone missed the mark on how much they could actually do? That kind of seemed to be missed in this piece.
Yeah, it did. And especially, but it did seem to me like they were saying that they're saying, well, I suppose, I mean, everyone missed the mark, but I think it was less because in terms of well productivity, although I think they did miss the whole like refracking,
Sure.
that was definitely something that wasn't picked up on until it was really being used in earnest. And then that became a big thing. And then there was well, it's not that hard to just like move the rigs a little bit to areas where, there's not so much of a bottleneck or whatnot. So I think that everyone kind of missed certain things that led to greater productivity.
Right.
And so honing in on just like, well, they overestimated well productivity regularly. So what if they overestimated well productivity? They underestimated all these other things that led to more productivity. I guess I wonder if it only it's like it's a useful information. It's useful information to have,
Right.
but I don't know if it's quite as important an aspect as they're making it out to be. Like I guess like if you're going to go and look at whatever at financials or whatnot and look at these predictions, just have in your mind that they're probably the production is rates are probably overestimated by maybe 5%, but they may
Right.
not be taking into account the fact that they can do all these other things to get more oil, even if it's not from that exact well.
Right, and yeah, that doesn't necessarily diminish their point about the overestimating of the individual wells. It's just to me, it was kind of a striking first paragraph. Like, well, hey, we all missed about how big this thing are because there's plenty of people that has said it would never get this big, and they were wrong. And I'm not. This isn't Ryan saying he's got it figured out. It's just like, hey, let's all kind of step back and say most of us don't know what the hell we're predicting when it comes to this stuff because there's so many things that we get wrong about this. And the other thing to that is, and this was kind of the thing I was curious your thought on is so. Let's just kind of get the chips on the table from my side at least. We've talked about this before. When you're a publicly traded company, it is in your best interest to get your stock price to go up. That's how that works. Well, I mean, I guess you could do some shorting and stuff like that, but generally you want the stock going up, which means that you have to make the investors happy, the shareholders happy, and the guys at Bloomberg or wherever happy. So it doesn't surprise me that Elon Musk constantly misses the mark on their stuff and says, well, we're this close. I mean, if he came out and said, "Hey guys, we're not going to do this ever," then the shares would go to nothing. So I'm not naive enough to say that doesn't happen. Obviously, the problem I had is how do they know they're missing? And the Wall Street Journal, it seems like they basically said we don't really know how much they're missing. We're kind of taking what they said, and then we're kind of taking what a third party person has guesstimated, for lack of a better term, and we're trying to comparing those numbers, and it doesn't mean that they're off by a lot or a little. It just means that it's kind of hard to figure out where exactly the truth lies. And then one step further is you leave out a company like ExxonMobil. It's like, okay, well, who all did you leave out? Because you say you left out ExxonMobil, well, Chevron or ConocoPhillips, or it's like all those things. When I'm getting in here, to me, it kind of gets convoluted. It's like, well, I don't know, guys. How accurate is this? Is this a Pioneer problem, or is it all of their problems? I don't know. Maybe being too critical. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I don't think you're being too critical. I also think that, I mean, look, say you're doing like a startup company or whatever, you've got to make projections and forecasts and things like that. And you know what? They are totally wrong. I mean, they're literally, you're like just pulling stuff out of your ass. I mean, that's what happens because how would you know? You haven't tried to start selling your product yet. So all of there's so many projections that come from companies are just wrong. And I think that everybody knows that they're wrong, or anyone who has ever had any experience starting a business knows that projections are going to be wrong or should know.
Right. And I guess the problem I have kind of in general with some of this is that if you kind of sit back and the way the system's built, the system's almost kind of built where it entices these inaccurate projections. So you have to report this, if you're publicly traded at least, a quarterly basis. You have to have these conference calls. You have to have these questions. And then you have a bunch of people sitting around writing articles looking, well, you said this on this date and this is what you did on this date. And so it's like, hey, the system's kind of built for you to turn in these projections so then we can either sing your praises or crucify you at the stake. And it's like, I'm a little bit leery of kind of that mentality, but whatever. It brought the question up to me though, should these companies make predictions in general? Yeah. Because it said like ExxonMobil doesn't make them. And obviously people like me and yourself and, our listeners, they all realize, hey, these projections are kind of, very limited, may not represent the whole field. And so some investors who aren't in oil and gas, they may not know that and kind of get suckered in, if you will. But what do you think? Do you think they should actually make these predictions on what they think their reserves are going to do?
I can see why companies do, especially if a company like ExxonMobil is saying, we don't do this. And so I can see why these other companies are like, oh, well, we do,
right.
to kind of give them an edge. But it may be in their interest at this point not to. Or they can make these projections, but they can knowingly underestimate.
Right.
Perhaps that's really what would be beneficial for them.
Right. Okay. So here's one thing that I found interesting. Parsley is on track to miss its Midland well forecast for every year from 2014 to 2017 by an average of 25%, according to the Wall Street Journal's analysis. Okay, skip a paragraph. Here's what it says. When calculating its estimates, Parsley includes other valuable hydrocarbons that come out of wells, such as ethane. In its analysis, Rystad does not include those hydrocarbons, known as natural gas liquids, because they aren't accurately captured in the available public data. When I read that, I go, well, wait a second. So it means that maybe that they are actually hitting their mark and you wouldn't know it.
Yeah, because you weren't looking at the right data. Oh, my God.
I read that like twice, and I wanted to read it to you to make sure I didn't miss it. But I just read it, and I'm like, well, what the hell are we talking about then? I mean, it's not, I have been critical of Shale producers, so this isn't Ryan is just toting the Shale producer flag. It's just, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know what to do with this. When I read this, it's like, well, how does this apply to Pioneer? How does this apply to all these other companies? Are you saying that Pioneer could come out and say the same thing? Maybe they could, maybe they couldn't. But this, I don't know. It just kind of was like, oh, good grief.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
I mean,
it's why I came out January 2nd when no one was paying attention.
I guess I must believe with this. One of the problems that we've talked kind of offline is when you talk about, the crude quality issue or these issues around the shale companies making money. To me, first off, it's not that I've got the issue figured out, but it's like when you go into someone making a strong stance on something and you start to try to say, hey, well, what about this? Or what about this? Or have you considered this? It seems like there's these things like this that come in here and you go, well, it doesn't mean that their whole premise is wrong, but you have to, now I have to consider, well, it's just like with these producers making these predictions. They could have been way off. Well, according to your own piece here, all your stuff could be wrong, or at least in Parsley Energy could be way off because you don't even know. And so it feels like sometimes with oil and gas, people want to take these really strong stances, and there's so much unavailable knowledge that we don't have that it, I don't know, it just kind of leads me to wonder why people feel the need to take such strong stances.
Yeah, well, I think, but it's also interesting because, for some people, this is all they're ever going to know about fracking. Except, but then, sorry, this other thing really gets me because it's like there's some sort of disconnect between the Wall Street Journal's reporting on this kind of stuff and then the Wall Street Journal's editorial page. So they'll write an article that's like, fracking is going to, save everything and change American foreign policy, and we're now going to be producing the most oil of any country, forever. And then, you read an article like this, and you're like, well, that's not exactly what it is. Are these people actually reading their own newspaper?
Well, and yeah, for me, it kind of gets frustrating because it's like, well, I really would like to know that 25% if they missed by 25% or not. That's really an important question, and it seems like we don't really know this answer, which could change things. There's no problem that there's no question that shale producers have struggled to make returns. I don't think that's a question here, but it is interesting. And to your point, they said, hey, at the end, they said, they should check 60 wells and before they put out their thing, and they say, "Why aren't we doing this?" And they say, "Because we own stock." And that's what you brought up earlier. I think that's part of it is that they do own stock, and Bob's production company comes out and says, "Our forecasts say this," and everyone goes, "Well, what are we doing over here?" And it kind of feeds this monster. So I don't know. To me, I'll kind of wrap up this. It got some interesting things. It's like the last time we talked about one of these pieces from the Wall Street Journal. It's got some interesting points in there, some things that they could be really good. They could be really good, but then you kind of read some of this other stuff. It's like, well, I'm not really sure how much of this is actually fact versus this is just us bloviating on stuff that we don't really have a grasp on.
Yeah, well, we'll have to leave it like that unless Bradley wants to come on podcast and talk about it. Bradley Olson.
You're welcome to come on, Bradley Olson, Rebecca Elliott, and Christopher Matthews. I hope it's hold on. It's not the same Christopher Matthews on CNBC, is it?
No. I think we want Bradley Olson anyway.
Okay, Bradley, you're welcome to come on and defend
Talk
your
about
piece.
this article.
We'll be nice to you. I promise.
Promise.
Okay. All right. Last piece from, and I got a Trump question for you. So piece. Okay. So from Bourse and Bazaar, policy change at China's Bank of Kunlun cuts. Kunlun.
I think.
Okay.
I think.
Cuts Iran's sanctions lifelines. So we talked a lot about the banks, how it applies to Iran, what are ways to get around the sanctions and stuff like this. And you kind of threw out some of these ideas a few months ago.
Yeah, so Bank of Kunlun was this bank that during the previous round of sanctions had basically been like the way for China to get around the sanctions. They were doing business with Iran. They continued to do business with Iran. The United States said, "Oh, evil bank, we are sanctioning you." And they were like, we don't have any exposure to you, so we don't care about your stupid sanctions. And a lot of people were sitting there thinking, well, can't China just do this again? Bank of Kunlun, are you going to be doing this again? And now Bank of Kunlun has basically said, no, we are not going to process your payments in contravention of sanctions anymore. And whether that's because they're now exposed to U.S. Entities doing business with the U.S. and don't want to to put that in jeopardy or not, I don't exactly know. I'm not like totally up on Bank of Kunlun's activities, but that seems to be the case, and that they informed their clients that they would only clear Iranian money in full compliance with U.S. sanctions until the end of April, when Iran's SRE exemption for importing Iranian oil runs out. Now, we don't know. That could be the SRE could be re-upped. We don't know yet, and we'll find out. We can talk about that in another podcast. We can talk about that later. What the chances of the SREs being re-upped or reduced or canceled altogether are. But Bank of Kunlun does actually seem to be adhering to the sanctions this time, and I think that gives you a sense of how seriously these countries and these financial institutions and companies are taking these sanctions. And everyone has talked about the other issue is that the Europeans want to set up this SPV to basically is this like financial mechanism so companies could keep doing business in Iran in contravention of sanctions, and they just haven't been able to get it set up. And they keep saying it's coming. Now it says here they're going to launch in the coming weeks. But the question is like just how much business is actually going to get done through this SPV. I mean, how many big businesses are really going to keep going? I mean, you could have like 30 tiny businesses doing it, and it basically doesn't really matter because nothing big is getting done. And so the SPV is just like, who cares about it? They may not even bother putting sanctions on it because it's doing such a small amount of business. But I did want to also bring up, because there was some interesting stuff going on, Tanker Trackers released its, I just want to bring up this picture so I can see, but Tinker Trackers released its accounting of what's going on with Iranian oil exports. And I thought it was kind of interesting because they said, look, it's still preliminary. In fact, um, not quite half of the barrels seemed to be unknown. They don't know where they're going yet. But it was interesting because if you do look at their accounting, so they've got India, China, Turkey, Syria, and Singapore, and then also the UAE there as as list as basically confirmed destinations. And all of those, well, Syria doesn't actually have any. Syria technically shouldn't be importing Iranian oil, and neither should the UAE. But otherwise, when you're looking at what's going to India and China and Turkey, it's all well within, and Singapore, it's all well within the amount granted by the US government within the SRE. So a lot of people were saying, that there's going to be a lot of cheating. It's not going to be working. Well, it does actually seem to be working.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at that chart as well. And the first category is unknown. Is that what I'm reading that as? The
Yeah.
question? Okay, so there's 370,000 barrels, just so the listeners understand what we're talking about. But that's almost 40% that we don't know where it's going, right? And so
That's true.
how do you weigh
Well,
that
one
in?
of yeah, so we don't, and it's just stuff you have to keep an eye on. I think there is one big tanker that seems to be heading for a Mediterranean refinery,
Okay.
but remember Italy, I think Italy and Greece did get SREs, so that tanker may be completely above ground,
Okay. Yeah,
completely allowed. So
I got you.
so and so we don't know where all that oil is going yet, but
But from what we do know, it looks good. It's just we got this one thing we got to figure out. But beyond that, it's in compliance numbers.
yeah, other than UAE and Syria.
Okay.
UAE is technically not supposed to be importing any Iranian oil. So
Right.
bad UAE.
Not.
And Syria obviously, but Syria's numbers are actually pretty low apparently. There's if you have the Tinker Trackers membership,
Mhm.
you can go on there and they kind of go into some of the like stories of the tankers. And there's one tanker there that tried to deliver oil to Syria but couldn't for some reason, and then went and just like hung out in Egypt for a little while, like in an Egyptian port, and then like suddenly took off and headed to Tüpraş's refinery in Turkey. And Tüpraş is the only refinery in Turkey that's importing Iranian oil. So I guess something worked out there and they purchased that oil and so it went there, but that's totally within the exemptions from the US government. So this is kind of interesting
It
that
is. It is.
things actually do seem to be working the way they were, or like for the most part the way that they were intended.
Okay. Which leads me to your piece, and we've talked a little bit offline on it, but I'll tell online. You wrote a piece for investing.com or Forbes about Trump's talk about low gasoline prices.
Oh God, yeah, I think it was Forbes.
Okay, yeah, and it's interesting because he said that he believes that they're here to stay. Basically, he said something like that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Now, my theory, this kind of backs up my theory here, is I think he believes that he can control the price. I'm not saying he can. I'm saying I think he believes it. That's my theory here. But so A, thoughts on that, but B, is it just an election type deal where low gas prices get you reelected? Does he think that's going to do it? Because it feels like, and I'm starting to see some angst amongst some of these people over here in Texas, and they'll feel like, hey man, if I get laid off, bro, I'm blaming you, because
Yeah.
that's the problem with whatever politician it is. You take ownership of some of the stuff that's out of your control, you got to answer for it too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know what he thinks. He says gas prices are low, expected to go down this year. Well, not exactly. If you look at the Gas Buddy projections, which I thought were kind of interesting, they're saying, yes, it's low. We expect it to be low for January. But if you like on month, they're gonna go up, could go up a lot actually in May, though we'd probably end the year with people spending about 3 cents less per gallon than they did last year. Of course, gasoline prices were relatively high for parts, at times last year. So, so I just have a feeling that he's just like saying like, oh, they think it's gonna be down, the average will be down. Well, that doesn't mean that come,
Right.
November or whatever that gasoline prices aren't going to be pushing $4 a gallon. Now, I don't think that's likely, but it's really, really low right now. I do think they are going to, personally, I think I think the real issue is going to come to a head in April, and we're definitely going to see rising prices as we hit April, and that's just me.
Yeah.
So right now it sounds great, but like it's also January, and gasoline tends to be cheaper in January than in June.
Oh, okay. Well,
You know,
I don't know. I like to get inside Trump's head. It's a scary place to be. It's just you get in there and you go, well, why is he saying this? I did read a piece real quick on the Dallas Fed. I think they took some kind of poll and they said that they expect the price is at 47 or whatever it was, WTI, and some of the members or the people they polled or whatever thought it might get up to 59, and they said that would be they kind of commented like, wow, that'd be kind of a big recovery, and I'm like, the price fluctuated more than that last year. I mean, it went way up, it went way down. I'm not saying it will or won't. But sometimes it's like we have such a short term memory. The price can go from nothing to something or something to nothing relatively quickly. And so I don't know. It just kind of caught me off guard. Like, well, that would be a pretty big increase. I'm like, hell, it dropped more than that in like a month. So.
yeah, but what is it? I mean, seriously, like, come on, what does the Dallas Fed know about oil prices?
Right. Well,
Sorry.
they polled they polled some people, which kind of like the Wall Street Journal deal. You don't know where it comes from or who they are or whatever. But I agree. Okay.
I was actually invited to take part in that poll for oil prices that we talked about last time on the podcast, but I declined mostly because if I made a prediction, so they were asking people to like explain why you made your prediction, and my prediction would be something like, well, I just really liked them. I think the numbers like 6 and 9 are, they're both divisible by 3. Like that would be my, that
My
would be
dad
my
was born in the
expectation.
4th month, my sister in the 7th, my mom in the 1st, and my cousin in the 5th. So 47.15. That's my price.
Yeah, exactly. I would end up like picking based on that, and then it would be kind of embarrassing to have to explain my reasoning. So no, I did not take part in that, but a lot more people did. There's a huge, it's very interesting, but nobody went very high. Like nobody is up at 80. And one of the things I think is so interesting is like this is supposed to be the closing price
Right.
for Brent on December 31st.
Mm-hmm.
So what's interesting is I'm more interested to see like what kind of biases are acting on people to make these predictions. So are they very like with people sending their predictions were very much affected by these sudden drops all through December, and that's why they're all low. I mean, but like why like there's no indication that what happens in December of 2018 has any impact at all on what's going to be happening in December 2019. Like there's no indication that there's any correlation between these two, and yet like in people's minds it does. I find that psychological aspect really interesting.
Yeah, we just referenced that on the Texas Oil and Gas podcast. I went and found your old tweet when you tweeted out. I think the low was 37 or 47. I can't remember. And the high was 80. This is from 17 predicting end of 18. And so the range was in there. But, well, we can certainly, comment on what they got right or what they got wrong like everyone else seems to do and make fun of them. I
Yeah.
think that's the way to do it.
Yeah, apparently this last year's winner was Brian Scheid from S&P Platts.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently he won. Not sure what he won, but apparently he did win. So
Yeah, we need to, I'd love to get someone like that on there. It's like, okay, so you won it. What were the factors that you looked at? And just curious, like, hey, how did you get it right? And if he goes, well, my mom's birthday is the 5th month, and
yeah.
we'll know it's a scam. Okay, Ellen, we're back. Where will you be this week? Because you've never really left your other places. You've been at Forbes and investing.com, but where will
Yeah.
you be this week?
So I'm going to be on Forbes a lot because we now have to write more articles a month. So I'm going to be a lot on Forbes, and but I will be this week. So I had a chance to tape a really interesting podcast on Friday from The Atlantic. Basically, they take like an old article. This one was from 1983, and we kind of use it as a jumping off point to discuss particular issues. So they took an old article about OPEC from 1983 and OPEC and Saudi Arabia. And so we talked about like what's changed between 1983 and today in terms of Saudi Arabia and its power within OPEC and its ability to use its oil production to affect the market. And so that should be coming out, I think, pretty soon. And I'll try to send along a link when it comes out.
Yep,
but I'll be there.
Okay, and I'll be on Texas One Guest podcast. And hey, we didn't get to it. I meant to send this to you. There was I think an opinion piece on Bloomberg about why the Saudis can't stop drilling for oil. Oh gosh,
why they can't? Oh, about like come on, why would you stop drilling for oil if you were the Saudis?
But it said it would decimate their economy, and I was like, if by their economy you mean the world would basically quit running because we wouldn't have enough oil, then yes, it would decimate their economy. I don't know if you saw it or not. I laughed so hard. I thought the person was trying to be nice. They're trying to be all this stuff, and I just thought, if you don't realize that if we don't have oil, the world just doesn't work. I don't know what to tell you, but
I didn't see this article until after I had curated the articles for the discussion this week, but there was another really interesting one on Bloomberg that was like battery, like we won't really see a revolution in electric cars until we have a completely different, concept of batteries. And I was like, really? You just came to this realization now? They were like, well, the current lithium ion batteries, you're really never going to get beyond 500 mile range. I'm like, if that. And there haven't been any breakthroughs in solid state batteries, so we're stuck. I was like, yes, really? We all know this. Breaking news. Like, wow, they just came to this. Really, like, I mean, come on, we all knew that like 3 years ago, more than 5 years ago.
No doubt. I remember sitting in a battery conference in Zambia. God, it's been 3 or 4 years ago, listening to them talk about batteries, and it was like getting your teeth pulled. And but yeah, that's kind of the impression I walked away was, hey, no chance here. Hey, we'll go, but we need to get we got to do an Elon Musk update. We haven't done one in a while, so maybe we can get an Elon Musk update or get him on the show. Either is good. Ellen, it was good to be back. Looking forward to 2019. And to the listeners, we'll talk to you next week.
Bye, guys.